Ever get that feeling? Like, what we see isn't quite all there is.
Yeah.
Like, there's this whole hidden layer to reality, that maybe we're just not tuned into.
Yeah, totally.
And if you have, well, this is the perfect deep dive for you.
Absolutely. I mean, someone like you, with your curiosity, this is going to be fascinating.
Oh, I'm excited.
We're going to explore some pretty big ideas today.
Yeah, we've got a whole collection of, well, let's just call them perspectives, mostly from this conversation between Clif High and Litecoin Lisa.
Right.
We're going to be tackling some pretty massive questions today. We're talking about the nature of consciousness, what might happen after this life, this whole phenomenon of channeling, and even potentially like a total shift in our technology, maybe.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot to unpack. It's a really interesting conversation, actually weaving together personal stories, kind of deep metaphysical concepts, and just observations about how society is changing.
Totally. And like our mission for you today, for our listeners, is to really go beyond just the surface,
Yeah.
To uncover some of the maybe even surprising connections between these ideas, maybe even a new way of thinking about things.
I'm game if you are.
Let's do it. Let's dive in.
Right.
And I think a good place to start is with the very foundation, with consciousness itself. What is it?
What really grabbed my attention right away is this idea that we humans, we're also like these vibrating antennas.
Yeah, that's a powerful image.
Isn't it?
What does that even mean?
Well, think about it this way. Our senses,
Right.
right? Sight, smell, touch, taste, sound, and even those internal feelings we have, those bodily sensations, it's all just information.
Uh-huh.
And it's being processed by our brains.
Okay.
Which makes you wonder, how much are we actually missing?
Right. Our perception could be so limited.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the idea here is that consciousness itself, maybe that's the constant.
Okay.
Something eternal, something that's everywhere, always. What changes is our ability to really perceive it, become aware of it. It's not that consciousness is changing, it's our tuning mechanism that's changing.
I like that. So it's like we're tuning into a specific frequency of this, like universal consciousness.
Right, exactly. And then they get into this really interesting, I guess, description of the physical body.
Yeah, this is where it gets kind of out there.
They talk about the brain in particular.
Yeah.
And I've got to quote this because it's pretty wild. They describe it as emulsified oil with microcrystalline little things.
Okay. Not exactly a term you find in a medical textbook.
No, not at all.
Mhm.
But it creates this picture, right?
Yeah.
This idea that our brains are these incredibly intricate structures.
Right.
So what's the point of that description?
Yeah, what are they getting at?
Well, the idea, and this is something you hear a lot in like the woo world, is that the body, and especially these microcrystalline structures in the brain, and they might be talking about neural networks or even structures discussed in alternative science, but they act as this interface. It's like they allow what they call the doer, which is, essentially our consciousness, to interact with this physical form.
So like our bodies are just vehicles for our consciousness.
Yeah, it's like we're driving around in these meat sacks.
Meat sacks, I love it.
Right. They even use the analogy of a marionette puppet, like the doer is the puppeteer and the body is the puppet.
So we're not really in control. It's the doer making all the decisions.
That's the idea they're playing with, yeah. They even talk about the vagus nerve and cranial nerves 9 and 10, what they call the X nerve.
Right. The vagus nerve is super important for regulating a lot of bodily functions.
Exactly. And I think what they're getting at is that consciousness isn't just this like airy-fairy concept.
It's actually grounded in our biology.
Right. It's deeply connected to our physical being.
And that kind of leads to this idea that they bring up that before we worry too much about all the external stuff,
Like 5G.
Yeah, 5G, environmental toxins, all that. Maybe we need to first understand what we are. Like really understand ourselves on this fundamental level.
Right. Know yourself before you worry about everything else.
Exactly. It's like know your own instrument before you start worrying about the orchestra around you.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so we've talked about consciousness in general.
Right.
But they also dive into a specific part of the brain that's often linked to, like spiritual experiences and heightened awareness, the pineal gland.
Yeah, the pineal gland. Very mysterious.
Super mysterious.
Yeah.
And they bring in this shamanistic perspective, which sees the pineal gland as not just a gland, but as a separate sensory organ, almost like a central antenna for our consciousness.
I like that, the central antenna.
Right.
And they talk about how it develops, which is really interesting. It actually originates from the soft palate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it keeps these connections to our nose and our ears, like functionally.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this little microcosm of our other sensory systems,
It's like an antenna within an antenna,
or even a controlling
a
antenna.
controlling antenna.
Interesting.
And then they introduced this concept of ki from Aikido,
Ki, yeah,
which
yeah,
I guess refers to a kind of life force energy.
exactly. So in Aikido, ki is all about this internal energy, this feeling of like focused power and vitality that you cultivate through these specific exercises.
Like what kind of exercises?
Things like breathing techniques and meditation. It's about being really centered, connected to your own life force, you know?
Hmm. Okay. And this is where they share that personal story about experiencing heightened aura perception after practicing Aikido and doing these key exercises.
Right, and specifically under fluorescent lights.
Yeah, that's a very specific detail. Why fluorescent lights?
That's the mystery, isn't it?
Hmm.
Maybe fluorescent lights somehow make this key, this aura, more visible. Like maybe they affect the subtle energies involved.
Hmm.
And in this heightened key state, they also mention experiencing close contact telepathy. Like, understanding another person's intentions before they actually do something.
Like you just know what they're going to do before they do it?
Exactly. Have you ever experienced that?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, I've definitely felt that sense of like being on the same wavelength as someone.
Yeah, that's probably it.
But speaking of strange experiences, this is where the conversation takes a bit of a creaky turn.
Yeah, they talk about observing a channeling session.
At Evergreen State College.
Right, and they describe it in a lot of detail. They talk about this like hovery band of light-like substance above the participants, and then this separate true entity that seemed to be drawing energy from the light and only giving a tiny bit to the person channeling.
So not like a benevolent being sharing wisdom.
No, not exactly. It's more like this entity was just sucking energy and giving almost nothing back.
Kind of parasitic.
Yeah, that's the feeling I got too. And then there's this part where a joe stick falls and breaks these like energetic filaments.
The joe stick is a wooden staff used in Aikido, right?
Yeah, that's it. And apparently when it fell, it disrupted the whole energy flow of the channeling session,
Wow.
which made the observer think that something strange and maybe even exploitative was going on.
So they started to investigate channeling more deeply after this experience.
Right, and they claimed that it wasn't just a one-time thing. They saw similar energy patterns at other channeling sessions.
So it's not just a coincidence or a weird one-off experience?
It seems like there's a pattern here.
Hmm.
And this leads to this belief in some like metaphysical circles that engaging in channeling during your life can actually have negative consequences for your energy and your personality in your next life.
Like karmic consequences.
Yeah, something like that. They even suggest that schizophrenia in this life could be linked to channeling in a past life. Yeah, the idea being that the antenna, remember those microcrystalline structures in the brain, can be affected by channeling.
Like dirtied up or altered.
Right, and those effects can carry over into future lives. And the key principle here is the permanence of the soul. This idea that the soul journeys through multiple lifetimes.
Reincarnation.
Exactly. So the imbalances caused by channeling can kind of persist and influence the development of your body and mind in your next incarnation.
Wow. So is that a reason to avoid channeling?
Well, they also make a pretty strong argument against channeling in general.
Okay, what's that?
They say that it doesn't actually provide any new information.
Really?
Yeah, the entities, the beings being channeled, they're just pulling from the channeler's own subconscious mind.
So it's like having a conversation with yourself.
Exactly, but you're attributing the answers to someone else.
That makes sense.
And they even suggest that these entities might be vampiric in nature. Yeah, like they're driven by this desire for sensation, for experience. So when someone opens themselves up to channeling, they're basically becoming a source of energy for these beings.
I see.
They also bring in a really interesting perspective from tribal cultures.
Okay.
They talk about the raven as a trickster.
Right. The raven is often seen as a symbol of like trickery and deception.
Exactly. So they're saying that these channeled entities, no matter how they appear, how benevolent their messages might seem, you can't really trust them.
They might have ulterior motives.
Right. And ultimately, they could cause harm.
That's kind of like the whole idea of selling your soul to the devil.
Yeah, there's a definite parallel there. It's like you're making a deal with a dangerous force, and there could be consequences.
And they also mention that large gatherings can amplify the energy that these entities can feed on.
Yeah, which is something to think about, especially with all these like spiritual gatherings and festivals.
Right. Oh, and then there was that really weird part where they briefly mentioned energetic theater surrounding events like 9/11.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what to make of that.
Me neither. It sounded like they were suggesting that these events might have an energetic component with the goal of, like, freezing time or
It's
something.
a pretty fringe idea, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the soul.
Okay.
They have some really interesting ideas about the soul, what it is, how it enters the body, and what happens after we die.
Right. So they start with this idea of the soul entering a pregnant woman as a physical presence, but very lightly material through her breath.
Through your breath.
Yeah, it's a very specific and kind of poetic image.
It is.
And they say that the soul actually attaches to the developing cells of the fetus,
Okay.
and that this is necessary for the fetus to develop properly.
Like the soul is essential for life.
That's what they're saying, yeah.
Wow.
And then they bring up the 9 grams theory, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah, the idea that the soul weighs 9 grams.
Right, and that it weighs slightly more when it leaves the body than when it enters, because of the accumulation of experience and karma.
Right, like the soul absorbs something from life.
Exactly. And they use the analogy of a factory mold to explain how the soul influences the development of the fetus.
Okay.
So the incoming soul, with all its unique characteristics, shapes the fetus according to its needs for its next life.
I see.
Oh, and they also talk about this shamanistic belief that souls don't fully inhabit the body at birth.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes they enter later, like around 18 months. And then there's this idea, siddhi, which are like these innate talents or awareness that we seem to bring into the world with us.
Like we're born with certain abilities or knowledge.
Right. And they share a personal anecdote about remembering the first day of being in the body.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful story. But the main theme here is the permanence of the soul, this idea that the soul is eternal and shapes our future lives.
And carries forward the karma from our past lives.
Exactly. So after death, there's this process called metamsychosis.
That is psychosis.
Yes, this period where the soul internalizes all the experiences from its life and, importantly, atones for any wrongdoings.
So not just a peaceful rest.
Not exactly. It's more like an intense period of reflection and self-evaluation.
I see.
And they talk about heaven as a timeless state of perfect bliss.
Heaven.
Yeah, but it's inherently individual.
Individual.
Right, so you wouldn't be able to communicate with others in heaven.
Because it's so perfect and individual that the presence of another person would be disruptive.
Exactly. And they share a personal experience of receiving visions from loved ones who have recently passed, and the visions focused on their peace and lack of suffering.
That's comforting.
It is. And they also mention Houdini, the magician.
Houdini.
Yeah, he spent his life trying to expose fraudulent spiritualist mediums.
Right, because he didn't believe you could contact the dead.
Exactly. And the point they're making is that if someone is going through metempsychosis, they wouldn't be available for a chat.
Makes sense.
They're too busy processing their own stuff.
Right.
And they make this interesting connection between the process of metempsychosis and the effects of psychedelic experiences.
Psychedelics.
Yeah, the idea being that psychedelics might give you a glimpse into or maybe even accelerate certain aspects of that internal review that happens after death. And they share a pretty powerful personal story about a transformative, non-religious psychedelic experience.
Wow. So psychedelics could be like a shortcut to understanding the afterlife.
Well, I don't know about a shortcut, but they could offer some insights.
Okay. Now, you, our listener, you mentioned that you sometimes feel the presence of your deceased daughter.
Right.
And they offer the perspective that younger souls with less accumulated karma might recycle more quickly.
Yeah, they might transition through metempsychosis faster.
So it's possible that you're feeling her presence because she's still relatively close energetically.
That's a suggestion, yeah?
This is different from channeling, right?
Right. It's not like you're trying to contact her or summon her.
It's more like a lingering connection.
Exactly. And they also caution against claiming detailed memories of past lives.
Because our current minds might not be able to accurately access those memories.
Right. There could be distortions or limitations.
But they do acknowledge the idea of resonance or vibratory responses to certain people or places.
Yeah, those instant feelings of connection or aversion.
Right, like you just meet someone and you feel like you've known them forever.
Exactly. Or on the flip side, you meet someone and you just get a bad vibe.
Yeah, totally.
And they talk about this yogic and Japanese practice of blessing all mothers, past, present, and future, which highlights the interconnectedness of souls and the idea that reincarnation isn't necessarily confined to family lineages.
So you might not be reborn into the same family in your next life.
Right. Your soul's journey might take you elsewhere.
Okay. And remember that photo you sent me?
Yeah, the one with the strange light.
Right. Well, they suggest that it could be ki or aura intensified by the fluorescent lights and the group energy work you were doing.
Like Misogi.
Yeah, misogi. And they also mentioned that film cameras might be better at capturing these phenomena than digital cameras.
Because of the way they record light.
Right. And they assured us that group energy work among like-minded individuals is generally safe.
Yeah, any disharmony is usually temporary, unless it's tied to deeper karmic patterns.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So let's move on to something a little less, I don't know, energetically risky.
Okay.
Let's talk about meditation and prayer.
Yeah, those are great ways to connect with your higher self.
They introduce this idea of three minds:
Yeah.
the body mind, the feeling mind, and the desire mind.
Right, and they link these minds to typical gender tendencies, which is interesting.
Yeah, so the body mind is focused on physical needs, the feeling mind is driven by emotions, and the desire mind is all about, well, desires.
Exactly.
And then they introduce the higher minds, the thinker and the knower.
Right, these are considered our higher selves.
So we have three lower minds and two higher minds.
That's the idea.
Mm.
And then they drop this bomb.
Yeah.
The doer that we've been talking about, the one that resides in our body, is only 1/12 of a larger being.
But 1/12.
Yeah, like there are 12 of you.
What?
I know. It's wild. And they say there are consistent gender patterns for certain archetypes, like Lisa and Public Awakening.
So there are multiple versions of us and we're all connected.
That's the suggestion, yeah.
And why is this important?
Well, they say it explains certain symbology and recurring themes in our lives. It also reveals the true extent of our being.
It's like we're part of a much bigger story than we realize.
Right, exactly. And then they introduce this concept called Shoshona, which is an energetic thread connecting us to our higher self, the thinker and the knower.
Okay.
And they emphasize that this connection is impenetrable and controlled by us.
So no outside forces can interfere with our connection to our higher self.
Right. And that means we're safe when we meditate or pray. We're not opening ourselves up to negative entities.
That's good to know.
Yeah. And they talk about individuation within a larger collective consciousness.
Individuation.
Right. So we're all individuals, but we're also part of a larger whole.
And what's the purpose of that?
Well, they reference this book called Thinking in Destiny,
Okay.
which explores that idea in depth.
Okay.
And get this, they say it takes at least 82 million incarnations to fully become human.
82 million.
That's what they claim.
Yeah.
And they suggest that the concept of trans individuals might be related to an affinity with the male or female aspects of their larger 12-part doer.
So gender identity could be linked to our soul's journey.
That's the suggestion, yeah.
And they note that certain archetypes, like Lisa, consistently incarnate as a specific gender.
Right, so Lisa is always female, and the male counterparts within her doer incarnate during her metamsychosis.
I see.
They also share a near-death experience where they saw 12 spheres, 11 small and 2 large.
Representing the 12 parts of the doer.
Exactly. And this experience suggested that there might be higher-level decisions affecting our individual paths.
Like our lives are influenced by forces beyond our control.
That's the idea.
Wow.
But they do say that accessing information from the other parts of the doer is very rare.
Okay. So we've covered consciousness, the afterlife, our higher selves, reincarnation.
Quite a lot.
Yeah, a lot of ground covered. But now they bring up this thing called the discontinuity dilemma.
The discontinuity dilemma, right?
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting, I think.
What is it?
Well, it's basically this idea that humanity is facing a major challenge, a potential upheaval of our entire global system.
Okay.
They point to the fact that billions of people don't have access to basic energy for cooking, that we waste massive amounts of energy in our current systems, and that some green energy initiatives actually result in a net energy loss.
Really?
Yeah, because they still rely on fossil fuels like diesel. And then they argue that global wealth is tied to this artificial scarcity of petroleum.
Artificial scarcity.
Right, like they're saying that petroleum is actually abundant, but we're deliberately keeping it scarce to maintain control.
Controlled by who?
They suggest it's a specific worship cult that benefits from this system.
Okay, that sounds pretty conspiratorial.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
And they even link this distorted thinking about energy to our vulnerability to alien intrusion.
Alien intrusion.
Yeah, that's what they say. Like, we're so focused on controlling and hoarding energy that we become blind to other possibilities, other realities.
I see.
And they say these distortions are maintained to protect the financial structures built on fossil fuel assets.
The powers that be don't want to give up their control.
Exactly. And this is where UFOs and zero-point technology come in.
Zero-point technology, or ZPT.
Right. ZPT is this theoretical ability to tap into the vast energy of the quantum vacuum. It's like free, limitless energy.
Ah.
Yeah. And they claim that these UFOs are here, in part because our nuclear weapons have disrupted galactic communications.
So we've been making too much noise in the cosmos.
That's the idea, yeah. And they say that ZPT has been known for over a century, but it's been suppressed by globalist elites.
The same ones who control the petroleum.
Right. They want to maintain scarcity and control.
I see.
So here's the dilemma. Freeing humanity with ZPT would create incredible opportunities, but it would also destroy the existing power structure.
It would be a total paradigm shift.
Right. And there are also fears that ZPT could be misused, that it could harm the planet.
So it's not a guaranteed win.
No, it's complicated. And they mentioned that local consciousness is involved in ZPT, which is interesting.
Local consciousness, what does that mean?
I'm not entirely sure, but it suggests that ZPT isn't just a mechanical technology. There's a consciousness component to it. And they say that the existing power structures are continuing to suppress disruptive technologies like ZPT.
They're trying to hold on to their control.
Yeah, but the ultimate point seems to be that this isn't something they can control.
Because ZPT is already here?
Exactly. The UFO sightings, the rumors of secret ZPT programs, it's all evidence that the shift is happening.
And they claim that governments and corporations already have ZPT, but they're hiding it.
Right. They're maintaining a system of denial and obfuscation.
And what's going to happen when the truth comes out?
Well, they say it's going to change everything. Money, governments, institutions, religions, all of it.
Wow. A complete upheaval of society.
Exactly. And they leave a listener with three choices: fight it, ignore it, or harmonize with it.
That's a lot to process.
It is.
You know, looking back at everything we've talked about today, it's amazing how all these seemingly disparate ideas are connected.
Yeah, there's definitely a common thread running through all of it.
Like from the nature of our consciousness to the possibilities of the afterlife to the potential for radical technological advancements.
Right.
It all weaves together into this incredible tapestry.
It's like we're uncovering a hidden layer of reality.
Exactly. And I think one of the most mind-blowing ideas is that we're not just individuals, but part of a larger collective consciousness.
The doer as a fragment of a greater being.
Yeah. Or the idea that the soul enters the body through breath.
It's a beautiful and profound concept.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, you know, if consciousness is eternal and all-pervasive, how does our individual experience fit into that grand cosmic picture?
That's a big question.
It is. And with this discontinuity dilemma looming, what choices are we going to make? How are we going to navigate this potential upheaval?
Maybe the first step is simply to become aware of these possibilities.
Open our minds to new ways of thinking.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey.
It has. And to you, our listener, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep seeking. The truth is out there, waiting to be discovered.